1 Peter 3:15 says, "In your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect."
Screw that for a game of knights. If someone asks you a question, you have to destroy them with facts and logic, TM, until they become a whimpering, shivering pile of goo. So utterly wrecked by your big Brian they are, they never have the gall to question you again. Otherwise, what's the point of being right?
Every Christian is called to be prepared to make a defense for what we believe.
Everyone is called to defend their positions more or less on basically anything they believe. That's not some special thing that only Christ Bobs have to do because they are so special. It's simple dialectic that everyone does all the time. Now, to be fair, you're much more likely to have to defend your position when you choose one that's not based in reality, but you wouldn't do that, would you, mate?
And the word that's used here, translated into English as defense, is the Greek word apologia. And this is where we get our English word apologetics. Apologetics just means giving a reason for what you believe.
While technically accurate in the etymology department, words mean a whole lot more than what they were originally based on. And apologetics is very much a specific type of rhetorical defense of a particular idea or set of ideas. It is more than just simple defense, but a framework designed to convince others of the impossible.
And when it comes to the realm of Christian apologetics, this can span a lot of different disciplines like science, logic, philosophy, and history.
And it can fail at a bunch of them too, especially the science and history part, oh boy. But it's rarely much better, if at all, in the logic and philosophy parts as well, so...
Christian apologetics basically has two goals. Number one, to provide reasons why Christianity is true, and number two, to communicate those reasons to the world.
Well, it would be really weird if it didn't do the second bit, kind of redundant, actually. Also, yeah, reason. I'll give you that, but I noticed you didn't use the word good or logical or testable or correct before reasons. Not that I'm trying to read too much into it or anything, but it feels like an accidental admission more than anything.
Now, this can seem overwhelming if you've never studied apologetics before. There can be all kinds of different questions people have, skeptical claims brought against Christianity.
What the hell is a skeptical claim? Skepticism is almost universally the questioning of a claim. And that's the thing. Most of the time, what happens is that an apologist will make a claim and then someone else will say, ask how the hell that works. The closest to a claim will be asking how whatever thing lines up with X well understood thing about reality.
Today we're going to talk through 5 basic apologetics questions that I think every Christian should be prepared to answer. Now, this can seem overwhelming when we see the broad spectrum of skeptical claims that's brought against Christianity.
So skeptical claims really isn't just a mistake. That's what you meant to say. Weird. And yeah, if you believe something potentially stupid, be prepared to get a lot of questions about it. Like, what is wrong with you? How does a person with a brain believe that? And of course, who let you out of the barn?
Or the many questions brought about by honest seekers.
As opposed to anyone who shows that filthy, claimy skepticism, they are never honestly and earnestly just trying to figure out what you believe and why. Because sometimes they ask hard questions that make you actually question what you believe. And as we all know, someone makes you question your faith, it's only because Satan sent them.
So my goal today is certainly not to give an extensive answer to each one of these questions, but maybe to give the start of an answer, maybe show you a couple of ways to think about each of these questions, and then I'm going to give you resources at the end of each question so that you can learn more if it's a question that interests you.
Translation: these answers aren't going to be very good, so do your own research, you lazy scum. But of course, do make sure that that research is in the designated area only, lest you accidentally end up somewhere that might again make you doubt your presupposed correctness, because of course that would be bad.
So number 1. Have the New Testament documents been corrupted? Well, obviously, when the New Testament was being written, we didn't have a printing press, so each manuscript had to be copied by hand. And when the original documents no longer exist, scholars use a science called textual criticism to reconstruct the wording of ancient texts.
An extremely fair question, and also not a claim, FYI. So, must only be from one of those honest seekers. But for one, if answered with the same honesty, comes down to, well, yeah, that's a big problem. Not only do we not have the originals, we don't have the original copies of those. All we really have is copies of copies of copies of copies of copies and so on, that have led to literally hundreds of thousands of textual differences between them all, making knowing what the big book of nonsense originally claimed effectively impossible. Fun.
When they have a lot of manuscripts and early manuscripts, they can do this with a great deal of accuracy. The New Testament documents have more manuscripts and earlier manuscripts to support their accuracy than any work of ancient classical literature.
A great deal of accuracy is a little bit vague there, buddy. That doesn't actually mean it is actually accurate, or even that it is mostly accurate. It just means that some portions line up together more than others. Of course, a change from a now lost manuscript that managed to stick around is going to be entirely not accurate to the original text. Ultimately, no matter how many not the originals you have, you will never know if you are reading an entirely different book from the one that God wrote.
In fact, most scholars agree that the New Testament has been copied with an unprecedented high level of accuracy. There's really just a very small percentage of variations between the manuscripts that affect the meaning of the text.
Assuming that's true about les scholars, if only 1% are different, 1% of hundreds of thousands is still thousands. And thousands of chances for something to be so different that it changes the entire meaning of vast sections of the thing is not something to sniff at. Also, the main issue is, as has always been, even if we had the very first books and an almost flawless procession of copies, that wouldn't change the actual factual accuracy of the book one jot. The Lord of the Rings has been copied countless times with near perfect accuracy. Doesn't mean the Balrog will arise if we dig too deep for lithium, although that would be hilarious if it did.
And among those, there isn't one that calls into question any cardinal Christian doctrine.
I guess if you define all the cardinal doctrines as the ones that match up, then yeah, I'm sure it does. But if those changes gloss over, change, or outright omit some important thing, well, you're just never going to know, are you? Thing is, what's weird to me is how an all-powerful God-man made these books to be the ultimate truth about the world, and yet allowed every original text to vanish into smoke just like that. If I were God, I would be pretty embarrassed that I forgot to send them some pelican cases for it. Oops.
If you want to learn more about textual criticism and the transmission of the New Testament documents, I highly recommend a book called Myths and Mistakes in New Testament Textual Criticism.
Yeah, no, we're going to be skipping the homework and going right for the answers. Thank you very much.
Question number 2. Is there any evidence that the resurrection of Jesus actually happened?
Oh, I know this one. No, not any evidence that would be worth a damn. Not the kind of evidence that, given any other circumstance, a rational person would stake their life and or reputation on. But because it's in the Bible, those standards go right out of the window, and suddenly, anything that sounds like it could be evidence is evidence, no matter how flimsy or completely unrelated it is.
So, esteemed historian and New Testament scholar Gary Habermas collected over 1,400 of the most critical scholarly works written between 1975 and 2003 about the resurrection of Jesus. These works ranged from the ultra-liberal to the far-right conservative, and he discovered that virtually every scholar agreed on several points surrounding the resurrection of Jesus.
Well, considering what I understand of the guy's methodology, it just so happens that the vast majority of those people were in fact theologians, pastors, and apologists. You know, a group of people that would have no reason to agree on certain fundamental premises in the Bible. Although even if that wasn't the case, the wording of surrounding is extremely sus. Simply agreeing that a man named Jesus existed at the time and was killed to death, and also some people said they saw him do a magic, doesn't mean that he actually then respawned with apparently a different face, mind you, and then moon jumped to the goddamn heavens.
Here are 4 of them. Number 1, that Jesus died by Roman crucifixion. Number 2, that Jesus' disciples believed he rose from the dead and appeared to them and were willing to suffer and die for these beliefs. Number 3, that the church persecutor Paul suddenly became a Christian after having an experience that he believed was the risen Jesus. Number 4, the brother of Jesus and famously skeptical James was suddenly converted after he believed he had seen the risen Jesus.
Wow, those are the best you have, because I'm not going to lie, they are really lame. So we have 1, a guy named Jesus died. Okay, well that's hardly saying much. The name Jesus was apparently pretty dang popular at the time. It would have been weirder if one hadn't been crucified, honestly. 2, you know what? 3 and 4 are all essentially the same. A bunch of people thought they saw Jesus doing alive. Important word there being thought, even if they weren't strictly lying. That doesn't mean they weren't wrong. As always, the fact that miracles don't happen and people don't come back to life means it's far more likely they were just wrong and or full of shit.
Habermas also noted that somewhere around 75% of scholars also agree that Jesus' tomb was found empty. The best explanation of these minimal facts is that Jesus was, in fact, resurrected from the dead.
No, it's not. Not even close. The most likely explanation, again, given that there is not one iota of evidence that any miracle has ever happened, is that the stories are either false or that the people in them are wrong. Also, the Jesus tomb thing is still one of the most ridiculous claims, as the idea that for no reason other than they felt like it, the Romans, instead of doing what they always did with peasants and dissidents and threw his lifeless corpse into a mass grave, instead took the unprecedented move of placing this random asshole's body in a tomb that wasn't even for him on the say-so of some guy who would have had no good reason to make that request. It's all, well, a little unlikely to say the least.
This brings us to question number 3. Has science disproved God?
Well, that's an idiotically phrased question. Has science, the study of the natural, disproven some random supernatural claim? No. Why would it? It is not in the business of doing that. However, when it comes to almost any supernatural claim about a natural event, within the Bible especially, suddenly you have some big problems. Because every time it's written that God did the do, there is universally a naturalistic explanation for said event, or that the event itself, by all scientific standards, been proven to have almost certainly not have happened. So while science can't prove or disprove broad strokes God-man, it does a pretty damn good job of making him completely unnecessary for any of your claims.
Scientists study the material world, and by definition, God is not material. In fact, the statement, God does not exist, is not actually a statement of science. It's a philosophical statement. It can't be proven in a lab. So in order for scientists to assert that God does not exist, they have to filter their evidence through the philosophical lens of materialism, which excludes the possibility of anything outside the material realm.
I love how dipshits like this think that scientists don't know that. I mean, hell, most scientists, as scientists, are loath to make any factual claims about reality, material or otherwise, because even in science, it's all statistical probabilities, not brute facts. That's why science is so good at what it does. It can change. When new evidence shows that those probabilities are less than what we thought they were, it changes. But yeah, very few serious scientists would even make the claim God doesn't exist at all. They would more than likely say the far more rigorous, probably not, because he probably doesn't.
Frank Turek offers this illustration in his book, Stealing from God. Quote, to say that a scientist can disprove the existence of God is like saying a mechanic can disprove the existence of Henry Ford. It doesn't follow.
Ew, Frank Turek, gross. The only follow when it comes to him is the distinct possibility that he is shit himself because of the bullshit he spews, stinking so much. You know, follow through. Also, the analogy doesn't even work. There's literally evidence that Henry Ford is real. And I mean, like, actual photo evidence for the guy. Not just, have you seen the trees type garbage. Can you imagine that, Frank Turek saying something stupid? Who would have thunk?
Question number 4. Does the Bible condone slavery?
Yes, it absolutely does. In fact, it gives explicit instructions on how to care for, where to buy, and what kind of punishments are appropriate for a slave, along with a few tricks on how to get free slave for life by giving them a wife and subsequently kids, and then upon the end of that type of slavery, telling them they can either have the family or have their freedom. And frankly, only the most dishonest of theists grasping at the most non-existent of straws will answer otherwise. Wonder what this person is going to do.
When Americans hear the word slave, we think of the abuse and forced labor of African Americans in the antebellum South. But when we look to the Old Testament system that God instituted, the Hebrew word ebed, which is often translated as slave in English, did not carry the same negative connotation it does in our modern context.
Oh, do have a day off. Slavery is slavery, and slavery is always a bad thing. Just because one version of it might be worse than another doesn't magically make the one that's not quite as awful not bad, you disingenuous pile of goo. A person purchased with money or taken during conflict against their will is a slave, and that happens in the Bible constantly and is 100% considered fine, while being, in actuality, extremely messed up.
So in ancient Israel, this type of servanthood was a system in which a destitute person could voluntarily work to pay off a debt. Although it wasn't a perfect system, they were given food and shelter, legal rights, and protection from physical mistreatment.
Even though that's absolutely still a disgusting practice, it utterly skips that it's also only available to fellows from the same tribe as them. Anyone from outside their little circle, or women, yeah, they are free real estate, baby. Don't have to agree to shit with them about their ownership. Why couldn't God simply come up with a social safety net or some other such thing so people didn't need to sell their literal bodies? A thing that modern theists love to bitch about when it comes to porn, but apparently it's okay when they do it to a foreigner and it's forever.
After 7 years, they were released from their debt and servitude and given a generous gift of flocks and wine and grain.
But only again if they were a bloke. I noticed you left out that women didn't have the same right. Weird. And again, if they had a wife given to them, gross. Well, hope you aren't prone to caring for your children because you might want to be with them. You're gonna have to be my forever slave now. Can you imagine actually defending this shit? Just wow.
In some cases, the Israelites kept servants from surrounding nations as a result of war, but they were commanded to treat them humanely, and those servants were also protected from mistreatment under biblical law. In fact, human trafficking was punishable by death in the Old Testament.
That is a complete contradiction. If it was punishable by death, then why were people allowed to do it in the very text you bring up? You twist and turn. Not a word of sense spills forth from your mouth. And I honestly can't tell if you even realize it. And to think that war slaves were treated humanely is a joke. The punchline being, they were fucking slaves, dumbass. Go on, say it out loud. I treat my slaves humanely. It's the dumbest sentence in the English language. Next to, I would love to see your 3 hours of holiday photos and no more whiskey for me. I have work in the morning. Who works in the morning?
Now, the type of slavery that was sanctioned by the Roman Empire in the New Testament context was a bit different than the type of system God instituted for Israel in the Old Testament. But it's interesting to note that nowhere in the New Testament is this type of slavery condoned. In fact, anywhere from 85 to 90% of the Roman population were slaves, and encouraging slaves to rebel against their masters would have meant execution or branding.
Didn't you guys have a literal all-power man on your side? What a bunch of wimps. And I mean, Jesus was apparently willing to do the dead, but even he didn't bother to say, "Oi, Romans! No! You can't own human being unless you're me, and it's for eternity in heaven." Although owning people's souls would slightly undermine the point, to be fair. But he could have at least coughed out a "don't own people, cough cough" between chugs of wine. Also, 90% of all people in the Roman Empire were slaves. I haven't heard that one before. Sounds like horseshit, and would you look at that, it is. Shonk. Also, I'm pretty sure the Roman slavery not am condoned is just a lie. But even if it wasn't, the fact any slavery was ever fine negates the entire concept that just because one was considered bad that the whole thing wasn't allowed. You know, because it absolutely was.
Instead, the Apostle Paul taught that slaves were on equal terms with free people in the eyes of God and encouraged change beginning in hearts. This radically countercultural teaching began to play out in history and would eventually inspire people like John Wesley and William Wilberforce to oppose modern slavery and support abolition.
Well, forgetting that a major element of the abolition movement was seeded in the Enlightenment, something that very much started secular values, what's more important is to just ignore all the other people who used that exact same Bible as the other guys to absolutely justify all the slavery they did. That was not because of the Bible, because it's very inconvenient to my narrative. Also, if they were so equal, you would think that he might have done something to make them equal. But you know God, way too lazy to do anything like help people or exist.
This brings us to question number 5.
Okay, great. But better make it a good one and not something that's immediately and obviously incredibly stupid. Otherwise, I'll have to laugh at you. No one wants that, apart from everyone.
Is there any evidence outside the Bible that Jesus actually existed? So this claim tends to make the rounds on social media from time to time, but the answer is really quite simple. There are 10 non-Christian sources that mention Jesus as an actual person within 150 years of his life. He's mentioned by Josephus, Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, Plegon, Thales, Suetonius, Lucian, Celsus, Marabar Serapion, and the Jewish Talmud.
Nothing that's actually worth 2 squirts of piss. Thanks for playing. Bye!